Hello, I'm Belarusian. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. As always, I hope you enjoy the journey. Now, in this episode, we're tackling a topic that doesn't usually grab headlines, but absolutely should: Belarus. The Eastern European country most famous for being Vladimir Putin's most loyal sidekick. Specifically, we are looking at the events of 4 years ago, when Alexander Lukashenko won the sham presidential election. Since the events of the year 2020, cooperation between the European community and Minsk has only deteriorated. But as we're about to find out soon, Belarus is also a critical piece in the geopolitical chess game unfolding in Europe. So let's dive in. Here is a look back to the past in our latest report.
Today marks 4 years since the infamous presidential election in Belarus, which saw Alexander Lukashenko tighten his grip on power. The country still lives with the consequences of the widespread protests that followed in 2020. Demonstrating against the rigged results of the presidential election, which kept dictator Alexander Lukashenko in power, hundreds of thousands of Belarusians took to the streets 4 years ago. Vyasna, a Belarusian human rights group, has documented over 55,000 cases of political repression since the start of the presidential election campaign in 2020. At least 4,500 people have received criminal convictions, with Vyasna designating about 1,500 of them as political prisoners. In January 2023, the Parliamentary Assembly of Europe estimated that between 200,000 and 500,000 Belarusians had fled the country of 9.5 million since the election. One of them was Belarusian opposition leader Sviatlana Tikhanovskaya, Lukashenko's opponent during the 2020 vote. After contesting the clearly falsified results of the vote, she was given an ultimatum to either leave the country or go to prison and have her children taken. After leaving for Lithuania with the help of EU bodies, she managed to set up an appropriate structure and currently leads the Belarusian government in exile. The European Parliament and a number of governments recognized Tikhanovskaya and her officials as the legitimate representatives of the Republic of Belarus. Moreover, the Council of Europe, the EU and the USA have established formal cooperation agreements with Tikhanovskaya's entity.
And now we're zooming in on Minsk to examine the issue in greater detail. First off, let's get one thing straight. Belarus is not just a Russian puppet state. Sure, Alexander Lukashenko, the country's autocratic leader, might make you think otherwise with his fawning loyalty to Putin. Belarus, however, has its own dynamics, and its people have shown time and time again that they are not keen on living under perpetual tyranny. Remember the 2020 presidential elections? Well, Lukashenko claimed victory in what was widely seen as a rigged election, sparking the largest protests in Belarusian history. The people were tired, and they wanted change. What they got instead was a brutal crackdown, with thousands arrested, tortured, or forced into exile. So, where do we stand now? Well, the West has been on the back foot when it comes to Belarus. That thing is for sure. Despite all the tough talk, the Western strategy on Belarus has been more reactive than proactive. We've been playing defense, while Lukashenko and his Kremlin backers have been creating more and more turmoil. But it doesn't have to be this way. A recent report from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace lays out a set of guiding principles for a proactive Western strategy on Belarus. And let me tell you, it's about time. The report makes it clear the West needs to stop reacting and start shaping the narrative. First and foremost, we need to recognize that Belarus isn't just some satellite state of Russia. It is a country with its own identity, its own people, and its own future. One that doesn't have to be tied to the Kremlin's apron strings. Now, to do this, the West must offer a vision of Belarusian future that is independent of Russian influence. This means supporting Belarusian civil society, the pro-democracy movement, and the independent media. It means investing in the Belarusian people not just as pawns in a geopolitical struggle, but as individuals who deserve freedom and dignity. The report also argues that the West needs to be prepared to engage with Belarus on multiple fronts. This isn't just about sanctions, though those have their place in the whole story. It's also about a multi-dimensional approach that includes diplomacy, economic initiatives, and yes, even security assurances. The goal would be to create a situation where Belarus has viable alternatives to Moscow's influence. And this isn't just about Belarus, it's about sending a message to other countries in the region that there is a different path, one that doesn't end with them becoming Russia's next vassal state. Lukashenko has managed to stay in power largely thanks to Russian support. Without it, his regime would be on life support. The West has a choice to make: continue playing defense and reacting to Lukashenko's moves, or take the initiative and start shaping the future of Belarus. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Marcin Zaborowski, Policy Director of the Future of Security program at GlobeSec. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, good to be here.
So Lukashenko rigged the elections 4 years ago. Protests ensued, obviously, and it seemed that the West was very supportive of them on paper, but it didn't have an idea what to do in order to help the opposition, which to some extent led to the ultimate downfall of the protests. Did the West actually have an idea what to do in order to usher in a democratic era in Belarus? And does it have such an idea now? Because some people are skeptical when looking at the way the West is dealing with Lukashenko today.
Well, I think that the situation for Belarus is truly dire, and for the Belarusian opposition on many grounds. I mean, it's true that following the rigged election 4 years ago, and by the way, it was just one in the chain of other elections which were being rigged. Following that election, there were protests. Then we didn't really recognize the outcome of this election. We recognized the Ms. Cichanouska to be the legitimate head of the Belarusian government. She resides on the immigration in Lithuania right now. That happened 4 years ago, and I think a lot of people have simply forgotten about that. What we have seen since then, we've seen the outbreak of war in Ukraine, and Ukraine itself having fairly ambivalent relationship with the Lukashenko government at the moment. So simply the situation in Belarus is just not on the forefront of Western considerations on our concerns. Meanwhile, the Belarusian opposition is very divided. Even the Belarusian opposition residing in Poland itself is very divided. So the overall situation for the population of Belarus is not great, and it's in no small part the outcome of our rather inconsistent approach towards this country and towards the opposition movement in Belarus itself.
So some critics say that unfortunately Putin seems to care about Belarus much more than we do as the collective West. Would you say that's true?
I think it's probably true. There are some exceptions. I mean, for example, Poland, Lithuania are the two countries which are deeply concerned and interested in developments in Belarus. Poland itself is hosting the so-called Belarusian House, which is allowing the members of Belarusian opposition to operate freely here. We have seen the influx of refugees from Belarus to Poland. The same thing happens in Lithuania. In Lithuania, there is the Humanities University, which hosts a lot of Belarusian students and allows them to undertake a free and quality education. Also, the most of the Belarusian government in exile is actually residing in Lithuania itself. There are some countries which are interested in it. But for most countries in the West, I mean, Belarus is just like this hole in this part of Europe, and they don't really understand what's going on there, and they don't really care really that much. Occasionally, of course, Belarus comes to the forefront of our news when we have a migration crisis. Or when there is a question of stationing Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus itself. This is when when the situation in this country comes to the forefront of our concerns.
Indeed, it does. I mean, this is as bad as it gets, in theory at least. You have nuclear weapons being moved to a spot where they haven't been before. So why was the reaction so muted in a way? There has been a suggestion on the Carnegie Endowment website that the West should keep pressure on Russia to remove those weapons. Can you realistically envisage a scenario whereas Russia would be pressured to remove nuclear weapons from a territory it controls, at least politically?
It can be only done via the similar measures, and meaning playing a kind of a tit for tat game. So Russia is moving its nuclear weapons to Belarus, so the West should do exactly the same, and this indeed is happening now. That more nuclear weapons are being moved to Germany, in the within the range of being able to respond to any kind of attack from the territory of Belarus. So we are in the kind of a nuclear game at this point in time. It's you cannot persuade Belarus to get rid of those nuclear weapons, which it doesn't really control. It's a Russian installation. It's fully controlled by the Russians. And when it comes to the security and defense policy of Belarus, it just really almost doesn't exist. This is a proxy state which does what Russia tells it to do.
Now that brings me to my next question. Some suggest exactly that this state has fallen under Russia's control. There is nothing that can be done, technically. Others suggest, well, wait a second, but perhaps there might be some strategic interests that could be exploited, like an authoritarian leader needs sovereignty. He cannot be a puppet because his own citizens will not be giving him the respect that he believes he deserves. So do you think there is anything that the West could theoretically offer Lukashenko to make him at least a bit less dependent on Moscow politically? Is there anything that can be done on this front?
I don't think anything can be done to persuade Lukashenko, but I think things can be done to strengthen the opposition, to support the opposition, and to not forget about the fate of the Belarusian people, most of which are very European-minded, are very interested in closer relationship with the West, and do not share belligerent attitude towards Poland, Lithuania, or any other countries in Western Europe. So Lukashenko, this kind of a game with playing with Lukashenko, trying to incentivize him so that he would loosen up its close relationship with Russia, and would be drawn into the Western sphere of influence. This is something which has been going on for the last 20 years, actually, since Lukashenko has been in power. He's one of the longest residing presidents in Europe. I think probably the longest one. I think he's been in power since 1994. So
Europe's self-proclaimed last dictator.
Exactly. So occasionally, every few years, the West is being drawn into this game. Oh, let's offer him some special status vis-a-vis the EU. Let's offer him an incentive of a few $1 billion to hold free elections. And then Lukashenko is playing this game and saying, yes, I will democratize now. I understand your concerns. And then he turns to Putin, and Putin offers him more. And without any caveats, without any sort of just money coming in cash to where Lukashenko wants it to come. So he's basically using this game to his own advantage, and that's how he's been staying in power. It happened so many times in the past. that we should draw right conclusions from that. The right conclusion from that is that the man is simply playing us, and he has no intention to democratize. He has no intention to be drawn into the Western sphere of influence. He is the man who is a part of that system. And he is as extreme as Putin is in any respect. And do not offer him more money. Do not play any games with this man. Just work towards strengthening the opposition and democratic movement in Belarus itself.
In a way, that's a compelling argument. I mean, there were casualties during the protests themselves. For example, Roman Bondarenko, this was a situation whereby a man was killed and still no independent investigation. Nobody knows what happens. It is presumed that Lukashenko's man got to him and had him killed. But apart from this, also, when looking at the way the opposition is treated by the West, coming back to the initial suggestion that the West isn't doing enough. I mean, there was a prisoner exchange recently, but looking at Belarus, Ales Bialiatski, the Nobel Prize laureate, is still in prison. Andrzej Poczobut, Polish activist and journalist, is still in jail. Nothing is happening on this front. Would you say that this is more an issue with the lack of like a coherent policy of Western allies? Because Poland could actually try and negotiate, but on its own, does it even have enough leverage over Belarus to do something? You need, for example, EU-wide sanctions to exert greater pressure. So what would you say is going to happen next? Are these people going to be in prison in like the next 6 months, a year, longer than that?
Well, clearly Andrzej Poczobut and Ales Bialiatski and other people are at this moment they being used as a trading weapon by the Belarusian government. This is an extremely hard situation for Poczobut's family. He's been in prison now for over 2 years in very harsh condition. And obviously he's not in his best health, so the situation is becoming very, very dire. I think that we should not get into the game that if we are nicer towards Lukashenko, then perhaps he would release Poczobut, Bialiatski, and the others. I think that the only thing that seems to work on Lukashenko is to strengthen our resolve, strengthen the sanction regime, and to play hardball. This is what happened 2 weeks ago when when Poland instituted the suspended movement on the crossing for the lorry drivers in Kozłowice. Then immediately we had fewer illegal migrants at the border with Poland, and we had the Belarusian government pronouncing its openness to talk to us about what can be done to improve the situation. So it seems like that the Belarusians are responding to more principled approach and stronger approach from our side. Maybe we need to do more of these kind of things, and then we will see Andrzej Poczobut, freed.
So perhaps also the Polish government could actually exert influence within the European Union to adopt the same strategy. After all, the trade in potash, fertilizers, machine tools, it's all there. It's probably one of the untapped sources of leverage over Lukashenko, which could be used to exert some additional pressure there. Marcin Zaborowski was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
And now it's time for Eastern News Flash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Ukraine's unexpected offensive into Russia shows no signs of slowing down, with a fire at a military airfield and a large-scale drone attack being reported by Russian officials. The development, focused on Russia's Kursk region, is considered the most significant attack on Russian soil since the beginning of Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
In the Lipetsk region, west of Kursk, a military airfield was engulfed by flames. Moreover, the regional governor reported a major drone attack, which led to evacuations in several settlements. Details remain unclear, as the Ukrainian side is yet to confirm any of its operations, though President Volodymyr Zelensky emphasized that Russia must feel the consequences of its aggression. Russia has said that the offensive involves around 1,000 Ukrainian troops and numerous armored vehicles. Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry claims to have destroyed 75 Ukrainian drones overnight, mainly in the Belgorod and Lipetsk regions. Ukrainian authorities have not acknowledged any strikes on Lipetsk.
The 8th of August saw YouTube become inaccessible across Russia, with thousands of users from Moscow, St. Petersburg and Yekaterinburg reporting issues online. The outage sparked concerns about whether Russian authorities are intentionally slowing down the platform to push its citizens towards domestically controlled alternatives.
2 weeks prior, one of Russian lawmakers warned that YouTube's video upload speeds in Russia would soon be reduced by 70%, accusing the platform of repeatedly violating Russian laws. This move followed YouTube's early July decision to block the channels of several Russian creators due to their vocal support of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. As access issues persist, questions are arising over whether Russian viewers will be forced to abandon YouTube in favor of government-approved platforms that are easier for the Kremlin to control. The standoff highlights the ongoing conflict over censorship and information control between global tech companies and the Russian authorities.
Russian leader Vladimir Putin has signed a law stretching Russia's list of undesirable organizations to include state-sponsored entities, in addition to NGOs. Initially introduced in 2015 to target foreign-funded NGOs, the law has since been broadened to clamp down on independent media, human rights groups and more.
Under the legislation, members of undesirable organizations can face up to 4 years in prison, with their leaders risking up to 6 years. These groups must halt all operations in Russia, and it is illegal to share or republish their content. The new law aims to close a legal gap that previously prevented authorities from labeling state-affiliated organizations as undesirable. Russian lawmakers have justified the expansion by claiming that government-backed entities from the US, UK and Europe are conducting activities against Russia. Experts suggest that the expanded law could be used to target state-backed media outlets like the BBC or Deutsche Welle. The Moscow Times is among the nearly 200 organizations currently designated as undesirable by Russia's Justice Ministry.
End of the line for this episode of Eastern Express. But please do stay with us here on TVP World, as there are many more fascinating stories coming up. For now, I'm Jan Thank you for watching.